Good morning. Glad all of you are here. Welcome to St. Vincent Anderson Regional, home of the newly designated Level 3 Trauma Center. Wanted to get that out. We're very proud of that and very proud to be able to serve the community in that way. Just in case anybody's interested, you know, if you're cruising down in Indianapolis today around 3:30 at Shapiro's, Ted's going to be there. So if you missed Donald yesterday, you can catch Ted today. Just FYI. But I'm here to introduce a very, very special person, a very special friend that in a short period of time, Tom and Bobette have become very good friends of mine and think the world of them. Tom is an Anderson native and was born in this very building, so thank you. Okay. Tom and his 4 brothers were also born here, so kept us busy. That's great. Okay. They were children of Herman, a Delco Remy general supervisor, and Doris, a 4th grade teacher at St. Mary's. Tom graduated from St. Mary's High School and began as a Delco Remy co-op student at General Motors Institute. While working on his 5th-year thesis, he met Bobette Ellis. 2 months before beginning Air Force officer training school, they were married, and that was 48 years ago. Tom began the first of many careers with Air Force assignments in Vandenberg in California, Andrews Air Force Base, and the Pentagon. Tom left Washington at the same time as Richard Nixon, but for a different reason. Okay. Tom and Bobette wanted to be back in Anderson with their 4 children. It was short-lived as they were asked to move to Detroit in the Delco Remy sales office. But they had a chance to move back to Anderson in 1981, and they have been here ever since. Tom was the founder of Remy, now a Borg Warner, while Bobette led the Leadership Academy of Madison County. The 2 of them have been involved in many things, but the United Way and the Paramount have been on the top of their list. After retiring from Remy, Tom spent a year and a half working with Chuck Staley at Flagship, a partnership that continues to this day. He became president of Ivy Tech July 1st, 2007. As he concludes his 9th and final year, Tom is going to share some lessons learned. Please join me in welcoming Tom Snyder.
So I wrote down here that my plan today is to be more exciting than Joe Clark's 401k presentation. Okay? That actually might be a high bar. So I was in San Diego Sunday through last night late, and it reminds me of what I've told some of you before, that Bobette was at a dinner like this and leaned over to a woman and asked the question, "So, Bobette, what's the secret to 40 years of marriage?" "He's been out of town for 20. That's an old joke, but it's true now. It's been out of town for more than 20. So we have a few Ivy Tech people here. Of course, I'll have them stand. Hold your thunderous applause till they all stand to be recognized. Of course, our First Lady, Bobette, Sally DeVoe, our regional trustee, Jim Willey, who is the president of the Anderson campus, LaCoya Rochelle, head of development. Stand up so they see who you are. This is part of our advertising we don't have to get gonged for, okay? Diana Lott, who is in charge of recruiting, is going to go speak to 400 people at the Career Center at Ebert just as we leave. Cheryl Haukamp is right beside her in our development office, and Brian Douglas, Corporate College. Did I leave anybody out? Now a round of applause. So it does remind me about the world has changed so much. Ray Haroon. Remy was actually a sponsor. Remy brothers were a sponsor to one of those races that won. There's a brassard. Those are the things you wear around your waist that prize fighters usually wear. And Donald Davison came here in the 60s to interview Ray Haroon. And he was living in a trailer park on the south side of town. So the fortunes of racing have changed dramatically, and that's one of the things I think we see. We know that, these people are celebrities. So it's nice that we're recognizing him. So you're probably wondering, here I'll go back one, you're probably wondering how I was able to put my family up on the screen just because I'm a speaker. Well, that's probably correct. But also it's Pacers playoff day. So we had this photo the year before last. So these are 11 of my 12 grandchildren. And they became, a story in advance of the 5 lessons that Marlene and Mike said, I'd like to come and talk about 5 life lessons. This is one that's not on the list. And the list is, of these 11, the 12th, Emily was too young to be on there. This is what I call the $1 million family, okay? Why is that? Because if these 12 children go to a state school in Indiana and live on campus, it's $100,000 today for each one. So it's 1.0, it's more like 1.2 or 1.5, or as a lot of your children say, whatever, okay? And it's a key point because that's the real world that we're in today. So what we have is that when I started in 2007, we had no idea what college cost. We thought about it, but we really didn't think about it. And now we know that college debt exceeds consumer debt. And every day that you see people talking about it. So it's really in the speeches that you're hearing today on both sides of the aisle. On one side, there's a candidate who was here in town yesterday who's actually honestly capturing the concerns of people that have lost their jobs or they have friends that have lost their jobs, and we in the economy didn't do much about a safety net. On the other side, seems to me a lot of young millennials and Snapchatters who are starting to see that they cannot afford to go to college, or they've been to college, they can't afford to have a family, or they recognize they can't afford to have children. And so those are the issues that we've started to face. So what I thought I'd do over the next few moments is kind of capture the journey that we've had and share some of those lessons with you. And I think what I'd like to do is, in spite of what we know are the challenges, Indiana is positioned for the future. The present's a little shaky as far as what we're doing, but the future looks bright. So what I said is, these are the 5 lessons I learned while I was in college at Ivy Tech for the last 9 years. And what I said is change is really easy. At least that's what I saw when I was CEO of a business and could actually ask people to do things, and they all came together pretty easily. A little bit different in the not-for-profit. Change is actually not easy. So pick up your red book that you have, open to page 32. Right? And so we talk, this book, how many know, Jim Collins? Everybody's heard of Jim Collins. So if you look on page 32 and you look on the left-hand side, you go down to the bottom, it says confront the brutal facts. How many are involved in a not-for-profit, either as full-time or part-time or volunteer in this room? Look around. Everybody's involved in a not-for-profit. So what we decided, and that is we had to get our not-for-profit prepared to deal with all the change that was going to face us. And those are the changes that we see coming. So everybody had this red book, 3,000 of them in 2007, 2008. And they talked about a couple things. They talked about do what you're passionate about, but do it if you're going to be the best. Get the right people on the bus. Particularly in the case of not-for-profits, they're all volunteers. Confront the brutal facts. And that's what this little column says. And in the not-for-profit, and you all think about a meeting where you've been there, is when we're in a not-for-profit, sometimes we're a little too nice, and we really don't know how to deal with the problems. And those are the issues that we had to face at Ivy Tech. And finally, the hedgehog. The hedgehog and the fox. The fox is more glamorous, does a lot of different things. The hedgehog sticks to the knitting. And that's what we had to do at Ivy Tech to make sure that we were there. So lesson number 2, and this is the one that was more difficult for the state of Indiana we're trying to face, and that is the facts are brutal. So we got this data around to share with people and said, okay, let's look at the states that had an increase in free and reduced lunch in this years that we picked, 07 to 11. And what did we find? Only 4 states, and Indiana was one of them. And we know that's the case. And when we leave this room and we go around the state, that we see more poverty than we saw 20 years ago. We know it in the neighborhoods that we live around here. The Lumina set a goal that everyone in the country should have an opportunity, 60% goal should have a post-secondary credential. Indiana is not on that list, all right, of 60%. We're on the bottom of the list. But who are the people that rank lower than us? Well, they're not what we would have expected, right? They're mostly southern states, other than Nevada and Oklahoma. Nevada for gaming, Oklahoma for oil. So these are the challenges that we started to face. We wanted to take a look at one other thing. We think of ourselves as a Big Ten state. So Big Ten state, we've got 2 great universities. That should really help us close the gap on attainment. Not the case. The Big Ten states with lower attainment than Indiana, none. Where do we rank? We rank 50% lower than the highest ranking state, Minnesota. So this is what we wanted to make sure that we understood, and we've been talking about this now inside Ivy Tech for at least 6 or 7 years, because we have a role in closing the gap. We have a role in 2-year degrees at transfer. We have a role in 1-year certificates. We have a role in short-term credentials. Lesson number 3, we had to change the college to match our students. We don't always recognize what our students are. Our students are different than maybe the students that we think about. We've got 4 Snyder grandchildren now either about to enter college or already in college. And they're living on campus. But that's not really the student that we see. The students in residence in a college in the United States represent only 25% of all college students. So what we may have done, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, doesn't happen to the majority of students today. So look at this, 20% of our students are single parents. Half of the African Americans that are in higher ed today in a public school are at Ivy Tech. Most of our students are working 20 hours a week minimum, many are 40 hours a week, and going to school. And this is the one I think that's most shocking. Of our independent students, what's that mean? It means they pay their own taxes. They're adult workers. Their pay is less than $8 an hour and going to school. So it means we're really a lifeboat for many of these adult workers, and it's important. Now, the funding has never really stepped forward to that because we're pretty new. This is our 10th anniversary as a community, 11th as a community college. So that we have an advising ratio of about 1,000 to 1 on some campuses. It's improved somewhat for the wrong reason. Adult workers have gone back to those 10, 11-hour dollar-a-year jobs and dropped out of school. And it's changed the ratio. But this ratio has not changed. The majority of our professors are part-time. It's great that they bring this career knowledge with them, but they can't be there to advise, and they've got to work on their schedule. So these are goals we've talked to the General Assembly about for 9 years. Still, Indiana, as conservative as it is, hasn't yet decided that that's something that we can do. But we are making some changes. So we've reduced the number of people who are working in prep by 70%. What we do today, if you come to class, if you need math work, you're going to take one class prep, refresher at 8:30 in the morning. At 10:30, you're going to take the math course. That's had a big change. But this is the one that I can get applause at any kind of graduation. Used to be everybody had to pass college algebra. Didn't make a lot of sense if you were in automotive, culinary, or even nursing to take STEM math. So we've changed the math pathway. We think now in the next few years that's going to do wonders for graduation. When I went to the first economic club in Indianapolis, we had little clickers on the table. And I don't know if some of you remember this. They thought they were there to take a poll. They were actually there to take a math test. You'll be pleased to know the top 600 people, the majority failed. So math is a barrier. So we are the school of first choice, and I wanted to give you a flavor of how we've started to reach out to people. So it's had some impact, but it's really important to understand why. Every year, about 65,000 high school students graduate. 25,000 do not attempt college. So that's really one of the issues. We've got 1 million Hoosiers in the workforce without post-secondary education. We're starting to make headway in there. This is what the high school graduate enrollment looked like a couple of years ago. It's about that same today. It says a couple of things. We put the 2 flagship campuses up there, Bloomington, West Lafayette. The enrollment for each of those are about 7,000 freshmen. The gap are out-of-state students. So as your students want to enroll, we see this all the time. If you're not a 3.5 with great scores, you're not going to enroll in Bloomington, West Lafayette, unlike perhaps 20 years ago. But you are able to start college, you're able to work on something, and the same thing applies to adults. We are the School of Adult Education. So I think it's important that we all understand that, because you're part of our recruiting effort. You're part of the issue that's going to have to explain to people at CVS, at the church, at the car wash, what are you doing? And you can do more. You can do more. This is the number of undergrads from the state at each of the campuses. So you can see what's happened here, that what Jim Willie and the team are doing on this campus. Mike and I talked about the medical center out there with both nursing and dental is critical to encouraging people that they have a bright future. So lesson 5, the final lesson, we're seeing it pay off. One of the things that's probably most dramatic is the fact that we now have 50,000 high school students, as we speak, enrolled at Ivy Tech with taking college-level courses before they leave high school, which means they're getting those credits for free. So it means that they've got a semester, perhaps 2, sometimes occasionally even a degree while they're still in high school. So they can eliminate half of that cost of going to one of the schools. We get about 20% of the students come to Ivy Tech. The others are going to all the other schools. So there's hardly a school in the state, over 400, that are not doing this. Surprising thing is first-year earnings are highest at Ivy Tech. Why is that? Nursing, building trades, manufacturing, technology. You can see much higher than some of the other institutions. Purdue catches us in about the 5th year. But it means you can have a great middle-class life and maybe go beyond there if you actually think about where you go and what you earn and what you study. Record number of people transferring. That's one of the big important missions we do. And finally, 20,000 credentials a year, half of whom are 1 year or less, which means that you can really get a great start without doing that. So that was the message. That's 9 years. The school is going to be around for hundreds of years. You're part of the institution. Let me wrap up with, a graduation. This is what it all means. Thank you very much.